Right. Okay. I think I'll start. Begin. Okay. Hello and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Okay. So we'll be talking about an Aboriginal language called Awabakal today. I'm going to share my screen and you should be able to see here. Right. And then I'm going to turn on this. So yeah, you should be able to see something. Let me know if you can see it. I think it should be fine. Yeah, so this language is the first Aboriginal language in Australia to be recorded from like the 1790s onwards. This language and the closely related dialects around it in the surrounding areas, well, probably the first people to come in contact with Europeans on a large scale. Now, the word they use is Awabakal, which means literally the people of the lake, but we don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what the language was actually called, whether it was Awabakal or something else. We don't know. It just means lake people, right? And the lake here refers to Lake Macquarie, which is just north of Sydney, in that area. Now, if I were to go to the next slide, give you an idea of what we're talking about. So Australia, so the area that we're talking about is, let me just turn on my pointer, if I can find it. Here we go. Right. So roughly this area, so you can see where I'm at. So that's like the Sydney, Newcastle area of New South Wales. We're going to focus on that. But the whole continent has been inhabited for a very, very long time. So Australia was probably settled between 50,000 and 65,000 years ago, probably. Most likely, actually. And people arrived from via Southeast Asia and going all the way back to Africa. So there was probably a land bridge that connected northern Australia with Papua New Guinea and parts of Southeast Asia. So that's where the story begins. Now, there were about 200 to 300 languages, depending on how you want to classify a language or dialect, spoken in Australia itself at the time of European contact. Okay, currently about 100 languages are still in daily use, and majority of them are highly endangered. So the 90% of them, so the reason you see these big yellow areas across, that's one language family. So this one family has spread out through like 90% of the country, and that's the Pama-Nyungan family, and that's the one that we're going to talk about. So all the languages like central, southern, west, east, where all this whole east coast, they're all from the same family. They're like, kind of like Indo-European, for example. The northern languages are we believe they're not related, but there are some interesting similarities. So they are different languages that have been sort of influenced by the Sprachbund of Australian language, or else they were the same language family that had split off and diverged so long ago that there's very little similarities left, and they're classified as separate languages. There are also a lot of language isolates in the northern areas. So some of these languages here are all language isolates that are not related to any other languages on Earth. So that's the northern part of Australia. We'll look at some of the features of Australian languages as we go along. All right. So now focusing on these are the languages that were sort of at the time of European contact, 17th, 18th century. Roughly looks like this. We're going to focus on the southeastern area. Probably you can't see. If you want, you could go to this website and and take a look at the map. It's fantastic, and you can zoom in on very specific areas. So we're going to look at the southeast here, which is the Sydney, Newcastle area. Okay. Now, all right. So back to this. So yeah. So this is again this area here. Tasmania isn't on the map because the Tasmanian languages are apparently, they've been separated for so long that we don't even know what language family they belong to. Or they are an isolate, or whether there were like 20 plus languages spoken in Tasmania itself. So we don't really know if they're dialects of the same language or the same family. There's such little evidence for these languages, and except for some simple word lists here or there. Yeah, which is very unfortunate. All right, so we'll talk about the recent history since the 18th century. So the colony of New South Wales was established with the arrival of the first fleet. First fleet meaning not the first Europeans to come here, but rather the first European colonizers on a large scale. There were 11 vessels under the command of Captain Arthur Phillip in 1788. So like probably 1 year before the French Revolution. So yeah, and about 1,000 settlers, including 778 convicts. 192 women and 586 men. Yeah. So Australia was established primarily as a penal colony. So yeah, so you've got all kinds of people being sent here. You've got settlers, and England at that time, the UK wanted to get rid of, number one, they had a problem with overpopulation, and they want to get rid of their convicts and criminals. And so what do? Send them far, far away. Yeah. That's what happened. So these are some of the people that were sent to the colonies. You've got Black-Eyed Sue and Sweet Paul of Plymouth taking leave of their lovers who are going to Botany Bay. 1792, you can see Black-Eyed Sue has a bottle of probably very strong whiskey or liquor or something, and Sweet Paul has her chest exposed, so you can probably guess what kind of jobs they did. And their boyfriends, being sent off to God knows where. In this case, Australia, far, far away from civilized England, right? So and where did they go? Well, they ended up here. So the area around Sydney, Newcastle, Botany Bay, that's all in that area, southeast. Records show that Newcastle was called Mulubinba. So we don't know if that's the actual name or whether that's just the name that they call it at a certain time, because we suspect that the suffix ba is a locative suffix, but it could also mean time. So there's probably no distinction between time and space. So Mulubinba is the place of a type of fern, or it's the period when the ferns are growing, the season of the ferns. But we don't know. But anyway, Mulubinba, Newcastle, that's in all the records. Now, the main sort of source of information about the language of the area comes from this specimens of a dialect. Of course, there are different editions. This is the earliest one. So the specimens of a dialect of the Aborigines of New South Wales being the first attempt to form their speech into a written language by Reverend Lancelot E. Threlkeld. Yes, this was in I think 1827-ish, 1826, about there. That's when it was written, 26, 27. Printed there, and then the author, of course, is Reverend L.E. Threlkeld, because he was the missionary and linguist sent to study the language of the people in order to write the Bible and the Gospels and promote Christianity and convert everybody to a civilized religion. That was his job. So this one. Now, that's the official one. Unofficially, Reverend Lancelot E. Threlkeld actually relied heavily on the local guy Biraban, also known as John McGill, who was his native consultant and who translated everything. He asked him, like, how do you say that, this and that, and everything in English, and he translated everything. And the sentences are quite sophisticated, which means that Biraban actually understood very complex English sentences. We suspect that he might actually be smarter than the guy who wrote the book. Anyway, that's just, conjecture at this moment, but yes. So Biraban, and let's look at who these people were and what got them to Australia, what got Lancelot E. Threlkeld to Australia in the first place. It was him when he was a lot older. So Mr. Threlkeld, Reverend Threlkeld, was born in Southwark, London. It was a separate little town outside London in those days, 1788. Yeah, so about the same time that the first Europeans were settling in Australia, he was born. So yes. Now, he was apprenticed to a trade. We're not sure what exactly, but he became an actor, fairly nice looking man. And later on a businessman, but he was unsuccessful in all these and decided to become a preacher. What else in those days, if you have nothing, to fall back on, become a missionary. 1817, so he joined a company of missionaries, went to Sydney, and from there they sailed to the Society Islands, arriving at Moorea in French Polynesia in 1817, November, the end of 1817. So he stayed a few months in the Sydney area, but eventually left to go to French Polynesia. He was based in Raiatea, if you know where that is. It's now, I think, still part of French Polynesia, where he became familiar with the Tahitian language and the Marquesan Tahitian language and the different dialects of Polynesian, which is a clue when we try to figure out how he sort of created the alphabet to write the language. 1824, he goes back to Sydney, New South Wales. Yeah, okay. And then he writes down in 1825, Threlkeld says, natives had assembled around his house cooking a kangaroo. After they had eaten, they came to invite him and his family to see their dance, which was on account of our arrival among them. All right. He noted that they were naked and that when they had concluded, they thanked us for our visit and wished us good night. That was his interpretation. For all we know, he didn't really understand the language and culture at all, so it could be anything. But anyway, let's just assume that he was correct. Now, going forward, very interesting comment here. This tells you a lot about the state of linguistics in those days. So he says, for the last week, I have, with the assistance of a native and another man, been marking a road through the woods in order to convey ourselves to a place where we intend to reside by land. Oh, this was actually, I'm not sure whether this is a typo or just a recording. This is actually a handwritten note that was just transcribed into, printed out, typed out. It is only by chipping the bark of the trees we can at all find our way. One of the natives who speaks very fair English is with me and renders me essential service in obtaining the language. So the Biraban, the gentleman who was in the other picture just now. I have collected several hundred words already. The idiom appears precisely the same as the Tahitian, but I would only mention this with diffidence, considering the little experience I have yet in the Aboriginal tongue. So he was quite honest. He thought it was the same as Tahitian, but no, it was not. No. It can't be further from the truth. The languages in Australia are not related to Tahitian at all. Okay, I think English and Hungarian are probably more similar than the languages in Australia and Polynesia. But anyway, he was honest enough to say that, considering the little experience I have yet in the Aboriginal tongue. Yeah, because he wrote this in a letter. Yeah, 1825. So this was in 1825, or the letter was received at the end of late 1825. But by 1826-27, he was already writing down a lot of texts that he had translated with the help of Mr. Biraban and this fella. And yes, and he ended up with this interesting thing: the orthography and orthoepy of the dialect of the Aborigines of New South Wales, part 1. So he started his writings already, started scribbling and creating texts, various texts ranging from a word list, so you have common nouns and verbs and all that, to longer texts like I want to kill him and stuff like that, like more complex sentences, which was very important for us. We were trying to figure out the syntax of the language. Now, so the language has actually been extinct since the mid to late 19th century. So that means within 100 years or so after European contact, it just went extinct. The native population, the ones that survived the wars and disease that the Europeans brought, they just assimilated, and there are still descendants of the Awabakal people in Newcastle, but so they don't have their language anymore. Pretty much, that's the state of the affairs. Now, Biraban, his name was Weebong or Weebung. We're not sure. We're still trying to figure out the orthography, because the problem with the text is that, like, different periods when Threlkeld wrote them down, he used slightly different spellings or something. So we're trying to figure out the correspondence still. It's quite a big mess, and sometimes words have this little accent mark that looks like this. Sometimes it looks like the one that goes upwards and sometimes downwards, and all kinds of different characters. I think I saw one that even looked like a circumflex somewhere in some word. So so he took a long time to sort of figure out what type of orthography to use for these languages, and we'll look at the reasons why this. So 1796-ish approximately, so the Aboriginal people did not have a system to reckon the dates precisely, so we can only base on conjecture. So 1796, Mr. Biraban was born, most likely in the Newcastle area, and the young Weepong, later McGill, was taken to Sydney and raised at the military barracks and acted as personal servant to one of the officers. Now, when we talk about being taken in those days, it meant he was kidnapped and taken as a slave. That's basically that, and raised at the military barracks. Yeah. And a personal servant. He acquired his English name John McGill from Captain Gill, who was probably the guy who owned him, very likely. Right now, and this was him as well, performing a corroboree dance. So this is a traditional dance, which he was at least allowed to do. An Australian Aboriginal dance ceremony, which may take the form of a sacred ritual or an informal gathering. I'm just using this very broadly to describe the rituals. I would be interested. One of the things I want to do is to show his markings, his tattoos, to people from other parts of Australia who still practice that, and see if they can interpret and understand. I think they're very similar throughout Australia. The types of markings they use. In some areas, they use different types of soil earth pigments, red ochre and yellow ochre, I think, and chalk and things like that to create markings on their bodies, and ash. So and they have very special significance. Yeah. So I'm very curious to know more about this. Okay, now, right. So everywhere, these are all the records. 1821, you've got Captain Allman talking about employing McGill and Jemmy Jackass, Wirakata, and Bob Barrett. as bush constables. So what do you mean by bush constables is they were in charge of basically helping the British to, number one, protect them from escaped convicts or to keep escaped convicts in their areas and to keep the peace, things like that. So the three more powerful in terms of men who could have selected, blah, blah, blah. So the text here basically talks about how reliable and good the three black fellas were that they employed. Now, of course, Bob Barrett pathetically laments to this day the snapping of his fusee at a desperate bushranger at Port Macquarie, long a pest to the settlement, who through that mishap escaped for a time. Yeah, so you've got people who escaped the prisons and they need help from locals to track them down and hunt them down and bring them back in or kill them, basically, things like that. Yeah, very, very interesting thing. So I'm just going to go skip right now to the next slide. Right, so these were the actual handwritten notes written by Reverend Threlkeld, and you can still find them today in the University of Newcastle and some of them at Sydney Library. Not the university, the Library of Newcastle, it's still there. And you can see this, specimens of the language of the Aborigines of New South Wales to the northward of Sydney. So not Sydney, but north of Sydney, which is exactly where Newcastle is. And what we did was we transcribed all of this, typed out, we got somebody who could actually read the handwriting from the Regency period, the early 19th century, and then they try and put it in either into a Word file, a Word doc, or an Excel file. And then of using that, then I would just analyze that using Flex Fieldworks. So to break down the grammar. So this is the first printed, 1827, specimens of a dialect of the Aboriginal of New South Wales. This is the one he came. So after several months, a year and a half of taking notes, everything, he said, okay, I have enough material to write a book. That's what Lancelot E. Threlkeld said. Yes, although he said it by L. E. Threlkeld and Biraban. But anyway, this is, so he was the missionary. That's his call. Yeah, so this is the preface. So in submitting a specimen of a dialect of the Aboriginal of New South Wales, no speculative arrangement of grammar is attempted. Out of upwards of 1,500 sentences which he gathered, the most satisfactory ones are selected. The English is in the separate column on the right side of the page, and it's very, very Victorian, very pre-Victorian. In fact, this is like, the late Georgian era. Underneath the Aboriginal sentence is placed word for word the English meaning without regard to inspiration of grammar, blah, 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 all these things. Accents are not marked for or want of type, but the last arrangement of the verb we, it is hoped to be, I'm not sure what this is. So these are things that we have to look through. So he did this, several editions of this text, plus the Bible itself, parts of the Bible. So the Gospel of Luke, Gospel of Mark, that's what we were looking at, and we're trying to decipher. Remember, this language has not been spoken since the latest, we're guessing, the late 19th century. So about 50 years after this book was printed, probably, I may be wrong, but probably the language went extinct or it became a sleeping language. So we're trying to recreate this language, reconstruct everything from the grammar to phonology, everything from this. There are other techniques, but we'll talk about that towards the end, and I will leave like 5-10 minutes for Q&A if you want to know more. Okay, so going to this, so here we go. So he created an alphabet. Now the problem is this. So the Aboriginal languages have a lot more. The phonology is more complex than the languages in, for example, Tahiti and the Marquesas where Threlkeld lives. So a little bit more complicated, especially the consonant sounds. So he had to deal with that, and we're still not sure if he actually could hear the consonant sounds. For example, Aboriginal languages often have multiple places of articulation. So they would have a T that is pronounced like a ta, ta. So you stick your tongue out between your front teeth, ta. It's a fronted dental ta. There's an alveolar ta. There is a palatalized ja, ja. That sounds like the soft T in Slavic languages, but with your tongue touching the lower front teeth, ja, ja. And there's a retroflex ta, ta, like in Indian languages and all that. And you have the whole series. The stop, you have the liquids, the la, 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 ya, and everything. So they have a lot of sounds that do not exist in English, and that we know that Europeans have a hard time listening or perceiving. So he might have actually missed out a lot of sound, and we'll get back to that. in a few minutes. Let me just go back. So he tried to create something. The other feature of Australian language that we know about is they do not generally have fricative sounds. So the, those do not exist as an aerial feature. Yeah, and I think you'll see this as we go along. Okay, some text that he created. Okay. Again, depending on which year he wrote the documents, the orthography is completely different. We have to like decipher everything and start from zero with every text. So, Unni bo bundua Patty among Kinba. Yeah. So again, we know that Patty was Biraban's wife. Yes, that is it. And then what else? Is that a large boat? Yeah. Okay. Very consistently. So where unwa boat. So you might be surprised why a coastal people didn't have boats. They didn't. They had smaller canoes, but they didn't have boats or ships. So a lot of words that he couldn't find a native word for, he just used English until the Bible came out and he started writing the Bible when he started using Hebrew, Latin, Aramaic, and ancient Greek words. Yes, and that was the mess to deal with. Okay, now, so kawal means big, and we see this a lot. The Aboriginal language do not generally distinguish nouns and verbs. So kawal means like large, but it can be big. It can also mean like a crowd of, or something, a noun, something that is big. So a big bunch of something, a big mass of something. So it's actually a noun. So generally, the only two parts of speech are actually so nouns and verbs, and little pronoun clitics that attach to the either the noun or the verb. And we'll look at this. All right, so these are all the text. It's really interesting. He liked to use the word bun a lot. He spells this differently. B-U-H-N, B-U-N, yeah, bun. Our consultant, who is Warlpiri, so Warlpiri is a language spoken up much further north in northern Australia, in the southern part of northern Australia, so the central desert area, many thousands of miles north, and he recognizes this is a verb to hit or to strike. Yeah, and he uses this a lot, to strike, or in Threlkeld's early 19th century English, to smite, smote, smitten. Yeah, strike. He uses this a lot. Blow, to blow. Yeah, bun, to strike. He uses this a lot. He likes to use it a lot. And in the Bible, where yeah, people get struck down a lot, bun, he uses this to translate. Strike me, do not laugh. Yeah, so bu bun bua. Yeah. We can see some of the sort of the pronouns. He kind of figured out the pronoun system quite well. So there was basically what happens. Just like in Slavic languages, the word order is quite flexible. Okay, so cases are very important, and he got the cases right, surprisingly. There's a system of bound pronouns, kind of like if you speak French, like je te vois or something like that. Tu me le donnes, me le. That would be like a bound clitic pronoun that So in Awabakal and in many other Australian languages, they generally appear in the second position after the first verb or the first word, whatever it is. They'll get stuck there. So we see this as well. Ya noa ja. So yeah. So this noa ja. This is actually two sort of pronominal clitics that bound together or something like that. So yeah, bun ke ye koran. So yeah, so this is like this. Otherwise, b, the b sound here is probably the u, the second person singular, something like that, we think, and stuff like that. So yeah, all right, let's just move along. Now, these are the things that he wrote about, but let's yeah. So I'm not going to read everything, but there's some interesting things they used to write about for example, over here, he writes, from actual experience, I can estimate the annual expense of the mission at less than £500 per annum. So £500 was enough to conduct an expedition into the other side of the world from England. Yeah. Taking out of this sum only £180 a year for the maintenance of myself, wife, 6 children, and domestic. So you have a man, a wife, 6 kids, and domestics here could be servants, slaves, we don't know. But that's enough. £180 is enough to support everything, or slightly more. Well, oh yeah, okay. So he's saying not enough. 300 a year, inflation. Yeah, interesting to talk about. I am fully convinced that though the expense of £500 a year may be decreased. Yeah, so talking about money and all this stuff, £100 a year, yeah, it's an exorbitant sum in those days. Yeah, okay, right. Now, the system, so when I said that the text was, my colleague transcribed a lot of the documents that were handwritten, into either Word or Excel. I could export them into Flex. So I use Flex Fieldworks. And what this software does miraculously is to pass. So any word, like for example, bung, 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 this with the n at the end, we believe this is actually the first person bound pronoun. And every time it appears in a sentence, it will actually do it, like pass it for me. Correct. Yeah, like that. So once you know what this word means, so I'm just, so like tiri gurung bang. I think gurung means poor, but of course the Aboriginals did not have a concept of rich and poor. So a lot of the times we cannot use like our perceptions, our modern 21st century concepts to try to understand them. So they didn't have a word for king or queen or leader, because the Aboriginal communities had like a very socialist community, communal sort of system. Everybody was equal. So they didn't have hierarchies. They didn't have sort of noble families and all that. So try to translate like the Bible with kings and all that, and incredibly complicated for Threlkeld, I can imagine. So yeah, things like this. So that is Gurabi. This B here is, I suspect it's the word for the second person bound pronoun, but I had to manually separate it out and to use and the system will just pick it up, and every instance of this word will be translated by Flex. Is pretty much how it works. And then after that, I can extract the data, put it into a PDF, put it into a Word doc, quite easy, Excel file pretty easily. I see questions. I will answer. I will answer this afterwards, Shallow, in a few minutes. Okay. So, right now, let's. Okay. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Now my screen has frozen. 1 second. Oh, there we go. Oh, yes. So, okay. Now, once we've sort of like tried to decipher the grammar, we discovered that Threlkeld, he got a few things right. He described in his own way. What we talk about is, it's not an ergative language, it's a split ergative language, and it has a three-way split. It's quite mind-boggling if you want to compare it with, say, Basque or even Georgian. Okay, I'm going to be very technical here. The language has absolutive, ergative. It's got nominative, accusative, and it's got some type of tripartite system, all in the same sentence, depending on what kind of noun or pronoun we're talking about. So in the same sentence, you've got like three different syntactic structures all in one. And this is not unusual. In Australia, we find this in other related languages as well. So like common nouns, the word for fish and bird and rock and stone, they follow an accusative pattern. They follow an ergative absolute pattern, which means that the subject of a transitive verb is always marked with an ergative suffixes. They don't use prefixes for upper cases. Suffix, and then the absolute is unmarked, like this. And then also the absolute is the subject of an intransitive sentence, like in Basque. And then proper noun people's names have like a three-way pattern. So to like the like nouns, if they are the subject of a transitive sentence, have one marking, the object has another marking, and then subject of an intransitive sentence has another marking, another style. So yeah, that's for names. And then for pronouns, they follow nominative, accusative, I and me, just like in European languages. So yeah, in one sentence, you have to like, your brain has to like scramble and unscramble and put three different systems together. Yes. Other languages do this as well in Australia, so it's not really unusual. So I said this pattern is extremely rare worldwide, but it's not unusual for Australia. Warlpiri has the nominative, accusative, and ergative absolute structure. Yeah. So yeah. So the last sentence is just like an explanation of this tripartite marking. So intransitive sentence marked differently from the subject of a transitive sentence, and both are marked differently from the object of a transitive sentence. If you don't understand it, I will take some time to explain it towards the end. But yeah, yes. So just because these people do not have a complex material culture doesn't mean that their languages are primitive. Not in the slightest. Now, this is an example of Warlpiri, so a related language, the same family, the big yellow space we're talking about on the map at the beginning. So this is one of the languages, one of the very vibrant languages. So if you say the man shot 2 kangaroos, remember, so the word for man is wati, so it's watingi palangu marujara luarnu. Now, So wati means man. The nge at the end of it, so this part here is the ergative. So we know that the man is the one doing the shooting immediately. Palangu is the object suffix to show a dual object in the third person. So they, but for two, as objects. And this is in the accusative case because it's a pronoun. So again, so the person doing something is in ergative. The pronoun that it has to be accusative. And the subject is unmarked if it's the singular third person. Yeah. So yeah. Marlu tiara. Marlu is kangaroo. And tiara is a suffix, it's a dual suffix too. There's no case suffix at all, so which means that maru tiara is the absolute case. So we know that the kangaroos are being shot at by the man, and the verb is to shoot, lua. And the ernu at the end here is the past tense, so they were shot by the man. You could also translate this as the two kangaroos were shot by the man, or had been shot by the man, any kind of past tense, and yeah. So the man shot two kangaroos, and that's the structure that they use. And we find, and then remember, word order is free. So I could put this maru tiara at the front and move the waringi at the back and all that. As long as the palangu is after the first noun or verb, the first word, then it makes sense. So Warlpiri has a very, and most Aboriginal languages have a very free word order. They can be, you can put anything, the verb at the beginning, kind of like in Hungarian, in Slavic language to show the emphasis. Whichever. So generally the word that comes at the front is the one that's emphasized, or some new information for in Australian language comes at the front, okay? Or the one that's important to the topic of the sentence. Yeah, the topic will be it. Okay, that's it. And then okay, so these are just what we've discovered. So as in Warlpiri and other languages of the family, there are two classes of pronouns, independent ones, which function just like nouns, and then the bound pronouns we talk about the palangu at the end of the sentence that just functions, as clitic pronouns, and they've got different alignment systems. Yeah, and what else? Two parts of speech: verbs and nouns. There are also small particles, but I suspect those are actually suffixes that should have been attached to the word that Threlkeld just separated because he didn't know what was going on at that time. And then in addition, there are bound pronouns as well. So the pronouns follow a normative accusative system of alignment. Yeah, that's it. Now, reviving the language. So we're talking about the text. So now we're using texts that were written by Threlkeld and we're trying to translate it. There's another option as well. We look at recorded. So no recordings exist of Awabakal, as far as we know. But there are recordings of the neighboring language. So Awabakal is spoken here, Newcastle here, but other languages like Gatang, which is for the north, Gamilaroi, some people spell the K. I write like with Gamilarai, it depends, but it's the same thing. These languages do not distinguish stops, voiceless stops. So K, K, G, B, B, D, D. It's the same thing, and it's often allophones of the same sound, depending on where it appears in the word or in the sentence. Taruk is here, or Taruk is here, and yeah. And we were looking at people who spoke like languages like Wiradjuri. Wiradjuri is here, this big area over here, just to the west of Sydney. Sydney is here, to the far west. Taruk is to the west, and then Wiradjuri after that. Gamilaroi, Gatang is up a little bit further north, and looking at similarities and differences. And we got native speakers to actually look at the notes written by linguists back in from the late 19th century to the 1970s, so that's a big period. And our linguist, who is a Warlpiri speaker, noticed that in some texts there were actually mistakes made by the linguists. They couldn't hear phonemic differences in words or phonetic differences, but they couldn't hear them because they were either da, 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 the different places of articulation that would sound very similar to English speakers when you listen to it. To speakers of European languages, they couldn't distinguish the sounds, not to blame the linguists, but the recordings were very, very clear. We found evidence of some type of voiceless trill, like a kursh, arsh sound at the end of words. We don't know whether it's a voiceless vowel or whether it's a trill that is devoiced like in Turkish. We don't know yet, but it happens in the languages in this region. So that is a new thing that we just discovered. So we're looking at, now we're comparing the key grammatical features, okay, the sentence structure, the words themselves, how do they use the words, and sounds and spelling. So that's what we're looking at. What else? And then, of course, so this is a map of the languages of the region. So Awabakal is spoken right here, right in Newcastle. Again, we don't know if this is actually the name of the language itself. It's just Awaba apparently means lake and Kal means people, apparently. So the lake people, but we don't know whether that's the name they called themselves, the names that other tribes called them, things like that. But these are all the languages in the surrounding regions. And we're looking at nearby languages of Tangati, what else? Yeah, Wanneroo and Warramai, we suspect are actually dialects of Awabakal. If they're not the same language, then they are very, very, very close to it. We also discovered that Awabakal is the source, or one of these languages that are very close to it, is the source of the word boomerang in English, because we have texts from 1800 with the word boomerang written in it, with the word boomerang spelled just like it is now today, and it's from this region. For your information, the word boomerang is not used in other parts of Australia. The boomerang is used, but not the actual word boomerang. Like in Warlpiri, the boomerang is garli. So they're not, they're not the same word, but we think it actually comes from this region, and they gave the word for boomerang, among other words as well. Yeah. Okay, so Gamilaroi is here, and Wiradjuri. Gamilaroi, Wiradjuri, these are the two languages we're looking at. Almost all the languages in the southeast are either extinct or there are one or two people who remember it, and that's it. So it's a very sad state of affairs. So that's why we were groping about in the dark, trying to revive the language, because the neighboring languages are all either extinct or with one or two sort of rememberers left. Unfortunately, the languages like further north in the central and northern parts, they tend to be more more vibrant, with people speaking the languages. Sorry. All right. So there we go. Now I'm just gonna unshare this for a minute. Stop sharing. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm just going to show you a bit of some of the documents that we're using, and to give you an idea of how different the culture is to what we, European or Asian culture. So this is an example of in Warlpiri of here we go. An example in Warlpiri how families work. So they don't have family names. The family name, which anthropologists in Australia call the skin name, right? That changes with every generation, and there are 8 groups basically, with male and female forms. That's in Warlpiri culture. So in other cultures, there might be 4 groups, so that kind of thing. And people are not necessarily related. It's just that they are sort of like considered to be kin. So it's like I'm in one group, right? I can only marry a woman from another group, but not of the other groups. And then my children will be from another group who must marry from another group. So that kind of thing. And the system ensures, number one, see, there is no incest, number one. Number two, everybody has a role in society. So if I were to meet a woman from my mother's skin group, I have to treat her as my mother's sister, as my aunt, literally. And if I met somebody who was my hypothetical brother-in-law's skin group, I would have to treat him with respect as my brother-in-law. And that's how the system works. So because of that, they do not have words for hello, thank you, goodbye, whatever. They have words for family members, and they would address them as family or by their skin names out of respect. So as you can see, throughout all the texts we wrote, there were no words for hello, goodbye, good morning, none of the typical greetings at all. And they noticed this, the missionaries noticed this, you're welcome, and all these things. So one of the first words you're like, how do you say hello? They don't have words for hello. Most languages don't, in Australia don't. They would call each other by their skin name or by the family title, to show their relationship. So Chakamara, Nagamara. So these are all the relationships of the different groups. So which is a problem, because when they're dealing with Europeans, they don't know how to treat them. They don't belong into their system, like what's going on. So a lot of the misunderstandings in the early years was because of this, right? They didn't know who are these strange people who didn't fit into our social structure, right? So these, I'm just going to go down. So these are all the different groups. I won't take the time to explain to you who marries who and who marries what, but who marries whom and who gives birth to what group. But so these are all the family relationship, and then you can actually create a chart. No, I don't have the chart here, but so that's how they do it. And then last bit, just a little bit before I finish, Gospel of Luke. So this is one of the texts I was working on. We were working on, and so this is a later edition, if you can see it, and you can see that the use of Greek and Hebrew logos. So the problem was when Threlkeld translated the Bible, he didn't find local equivalents for a lot of the words. They didn't exist. So he used basically Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and Aramaic words and converted them a little bit to fit into the phonology of the languages, plot them in, and assume people would understand. They didn't. So the Church of England considered his mission to be a failed one because he didn't convert anybody at the beginning, because they didn't understand what he was trying to preach to them. Yeah. Yes. Herod. Takaria with the DH is a ta sound. We suspect it's a ta is Zachariah. Yeah. Herod. Yeah. So things like Eloi is God, like Elohim. So there are no fricatives. So Eloi, Eloi, and things so things like this. Yeah, we have to work with. Yeah. So I think that's it. I'm going to do 10:40. It's 45 minutes. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll do a brief Q&A session. Anybody have any questions? You can ask me right now or put it in the chat. Okay. Cora means Gonzalo wrote. Yes, Yikora means no or not like he is not. Yeah, it's a negation, but it's not a statement no. It's like it is not or it was not. That it's Yikora, but sometimes he writes the yi separately, and yeah, because of but it's actually Yikora, we suspect. Oh yeah, so ergative means oh dear, Sonia, you asked a very yeah, a very good question. Someone explained ergative. So the ergative means the subject of a transitive sentence. So like I love you. So in most languages, European languages, I here is like nominative, you would be accusative. But in an ergative language, I is marked with a separate suffix to show that it's the subject. And you will not have any marking at all. That's basically it. So that's how it's marked. Yeah. It's kind of like Hindi. If you speak Hindi, then it's like mene pyar kiya. Like I fell in love. So mene. So I did love. So in the past tense, there's a suffix ne to show that the person doing it, the subject is me. That kind of thing. I hope that is clear. But feel free to ask. Yeah, I'll hang around for a few more minutes. Any other questions? Any comments? Feel free to. Yeah.
Well, another question I do have is, I noticed on the map of the different groups, especially in the Southwest, it seemed like a lot of the languages or the cultures had repeated names. Like I can't remember one offhand. Can you talk about that feature of the language
Absolutely.
family?
Absolutely. I'll try to find a slide 1 second. And yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay. So share my screen 1 second. Absolutely. Here we go. This map. Oops, sorry. Yeah.
Exactly, like Wadi, Wemba, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we don't know about these languages a lot. Some of them are, yeah. So some people even say there were like 700 languages. Again, you know, this like what is a language, what is a dialect? But the Southwestern languages, I'm not very familiar with them, but they do have a lot of repetition going on. So the languages very often the languages don't have a specific ethnonym for themselves. It's what the other tribes call them. So there's an area where they call them like Gugu Yimitira, the people who say Gugu, which is the word for either yes or no, depending on what they say. So they might even be their word for yes, 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 no, no, like as the name of the tribe that the other tribes call them. So yeah, so Wadi could be like yes, yes or no, yes, the yes, yes people and the no, no people or something like that. It's yeah. So it's named, it's exonyms are named the other tribes call them. Right. So that's it depends on the country, on the which part of the country. Yeah, Yorta, Bara, yeah, something like this. Yeah, so that's more of the southwest. This is the southwest of New South Wales. So this is like the southeast of Australia. So it's a huge country. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, see some of the comments. Any other questions? Yeah, feel free to ask. Anything else? Yeah. So another interesting thing we noticed is that the missionaries they didn't know how the missionary who wrote just the one guy who wrote the Awabakal text he didn't write about the inclusive exclusive like I and we, you know, the we and you and we without you. That's very, very common in Australia, but he didn't write about it. So we think he probably missed it or didn't understand it. Well, the concept. Yeah. So that's a lot of stuff missing that we had to sort of recreate. There was also text, also sign language. Like almost all Aboriginal languages, Aboriginal groups have a sign language system, and there are a couple of reasons why. Aboriginal people are probably very genetically prone to ear disease. It's very common in communities, like different types of inner ear infections, people going deaf early. It's very common. Almost every group has their sign language. And he didn't say anything about it, number one, and about the kinship system and all that, nothing at all. So yeah, we know that there was a lot of stuff that he missed out or did not understand. Yeah. All right, thanks guys. Thank you, everybody. See you.